Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of KRAD COVID Readings as I adjust my chair. I'm Keith R.A. DeCandido, reading my writings in order to ameliorate the horrible situation that we all find ourselves in. I'm continuing this week's theme of doing stories from the Precinct universe. This is a story that was I wrote originally for this collection, Tales from Dragon Precinct. Half the stories actually more than half of the stories. 6 of the 10 stories that are in this collection had been written previously and appeared either in other anthologies or in one case as a Kickstarter-supported story. However, I also wrote 4 new stories for this collection, which came out originally in 2013. And one of them is called Heroes Welcome, which is kind of a sequel to Dragon Precinct, the first book in the series. Dragon Precinct featured the members of a heroic quest, which is basically straight out of any D&D campaign. It included a fighter named Gan Brightblade, a wizard named Altharloth Sirhans, who was an elf, a dwarven warrior named Ubarlig, a cleric, priest of Temisa named Genero, 2 halfling twins named Mary and Nary, and a barbarian named Bog. 4 of the members of the party are killed over the course of Dragon Precinct, including Gan Brightblade, Altharloth Sirhans, and Mary and Nary. This story, Heroes Welcome, is partly about the 3 survivors, Genero, Ubarlig, and Bog, as well as a flashback to one of their adventures in the past. So, without further ado, here is Heroes Welcome. The party approached the abandoned castle cautiously. The road to the edifice was overgrown, and Gan Brightblade, who of course took the lead, had to hack through branches and bushes that impeded their forward movement. From right behind him, Altharloth Sirhans muttered, "You do know that I can magically clear a path, yes?" "No," Brightblade said emphatically. "We cannot risk that Mitos will detect your spells. Then all will be lost." Althar testily replied, "Assuming, of course, that Mitos is there." He glanced back at Brother Genero, who, along with the halfling twins, Mary and Nary, was in the center of the group. From behind Genero, Ubarlig, the dwarf, grinned. "Do you doubt our Temisan priest's visions, Sirhans? I would no sooner doubt that he had a vision, dwarf, than I would doubt that you have never bathed a day in your life. It is the contents of the vision that I call into question, as it was, as is typical of Genero's goddess, somewhat vague." Genero shrugged in his battered red robes, making him look far shabbier than the average Temisan priest. But then, he was hardly an average priest. "I cannot control the visions that Temisa sends me. I can but interpret them." From the rear, Bog the Barbarian finished the priest's words in a sing-song voice. "To the best of my ability, babble, babble, babble. We heard it all before, Genero, and we don't give a shit. At least the ways I don't. Let's just get there so I can bust some heads." Bog smiled, displaying a mouth that had very few teeth in it. "I ain't beat somebody up in days." "You're not bloody likely to beat anybody up here, either," Mary said. Nary added, "It ain't like there's nobody round here. The place has obviously been abandoned for decades." "Why'd we just stay in Treemark?" Mary asked. "Yeah, there was lots of people there," Nary said. "Betcha Bog could have found lots of folks to beat up." Genero gave the twins a sidelong glance. "And found some innocents to fleece?" Mary grinned. "Hey, look, if they're dim enough to fall for our grifts, they ain't innocent of nothing." "Silence!" Brightblade snapped, coming to a sudden halt. Althar, Genero, Mary, Nary, Ubarlig, and Bog all did likewise. Everyone either unsheathed their weapons or held up the ones they'd already had out. The party had arrived at a drawbridge that led to the ancient castle, as expected. The drawbridge was down, but rotted and pitted, also, as expected. However, there was a sentinel guarding the bridge, which was most assuredly not expected, especially since this sentinel was a troll. Brightblade had to at least try to talk to the troll first. As he walked forward, Althar hissed, "What are you doing? I can get rid of this beast with but a gesture." "No!" Brightblade held up one hand to stay Althar. "Let me solve this with words, or steel. We must not alert Mitos that we have a mage of your strength with us." Althar snorted. If Mitos really was in this castle, which he seriously doubted, either he already knew exactly who was approaching or didn't care all that much. Either way, if he'd placed the troll here the minute they defeated the monster, Mitos would know that he was beaten by Gan Brightblade. And everyone in Flingarian knew that the Elf Queen's cousin, the wizard, often traveled with Brightblade. As Brightblade approached the troll, who stood ramrod straight at the edge of the drawbridge, great sword point down in the ground in front of him with two massive hands on the jeweled hilt, the creature said in a deep monotone, "None may cross this drawbridge. Any who attempt to do so will be killed where they stand." Ubarlig frowned. "Strangely eloquent for a troll. Now do you believe that Mitos is behind this, Lothsirians?" "Hardly," Althar said dismissively, "since the troll's words are coming not from the troll himself, but rather from a charm embedded in that jewel in the hilt. Any idiot can purchase such a charm." "Any well-to-do idiot," Mary said. Nary added, "Those charms ain't cheap, you know." "Either way," Althar said, "the eloquent troll doesn't prove that..." Whatever it didn't prove would never be known, as Althar's rant was interrupted by the troll's sudden movement. Brightblade had been slowly moving forward in a guarded position, and apparently he crossed some manner of threshold, as after taking one particular step, the troll moved to attack. Brightblade parried the blow easily. The troll and the hero exchanged several sword blows before Bog pushed past the others and moved to join the fray. "Enough of this shit," he said. "Time to kick some troll." Arrgh! Bog screamed that last when he was suddenly thrown backward when he reached the same spot Brightblade had crossed to make the troll attack him. The barbarian went careening into Genero and the halfling twins, knocking all four of them to the ground in a heap of arms and legs and cries of pain. "Get this big lug off of me!" Mary cried, even as Ubarlig moved forward gingerly. "Don't be an ass, dwarf," Althar said, even as Brightblade continued to trade sword blows with the troll. "There's nothing you can do." "We cannot simply allow Gan to fight that troll alone," Ubarlig cried angrily. Althar smiled derisively. "Of course we can't. I said there's nothing you can do. There's quite a bit that I can do." And then the elf gestured, and suddenly the troll was lifted off the ground as if from a mighty wind, which then tossed the creature and his great sword into the moat that surrounded the castle. A spark of light followed that made the very air in front of where Ubarlig stood glow for a moment. "Now we may proceed." Brightblade whirled angrily on Althar. "I would have defeated him!" "Possibly. I chose not to take the risk for a surprise that no longer exists." "Althar," Brightblade started, but the wizard cut him off. "The moment that troll spoke and the barricade between you and the rest of us was erected, whoever was in that castle knew exactly what is happening out here. Preventing me from using my magic from this point forward will serve only to cripple us to no good end. Now let us proceed across this bridge and see what precisely that troll was guarding against." Brother Genero of Valessa walked into the dining area of the Dog and Duck Inn in Cliff's End, with the same feeling of discontent that had been present since he arrived in this city-state. He had come to Cliff's End with a purpose, alongside his dearest comrades, prepared to take on the evil wizard known as Chomrake the Foul, whom Tamisa had told him had resurrected himself. But an incident on the road to Cliff's End had far-reaching consequences, as a young man who tried to rob them went on to study chronotic magic, and then traveled to his own past to enact revenge, killing Gan Brightblade, Althar Lothsirhans, and Marion Nary, before the Cliff's End Castle Guard had found and incarcerated him. To make matters worse, they had been assured by the Brotherhood of Wizards that Chomrake was not a threat, and that their trip had been for naught. The three survivors, Genero, Bog, and Ubarlig, had remained in Cliff's End through midsummer, and beyond, the owner of the Dog and Duck allowing them to stay as long as they liked, free of charge. Lord Albin and Lady Mirka had offered to let them stay in the castle, but Brother Genero did not wish to abuse their hospitality. Besides, Bog was chafing in so much comfort. Speaking of the barbarian, he sat at their usual table in the far corner of the inn's dining room, Ubarlig alongside him. Along the way, the priest nodded to those he knew, some old acquaintances like Corvin, the former vampire hunter, who always ate breakfast at the Dog and Duck. Others, new friends made here at the inn, where the trio had spent their evenings telling stories of their adventures, one of the conditions of their free room and board. "You're looking haggard, old friend," Ubarlig said without preamble, as Genero sat next to him at the round table. A mug of tea was already on the table, as it had been every morning. The priest nodded. "I prayed to Tamisa again this morning, and she remained silent." "Gods are fickle bastards. Bog said. I remember you telling me once how you'd go years without hearing from her. Nodding, General said, I know, Bog, I know, but... He let out a long sigh, and then took a sip of his tea before continuing. It was bitter and scalding, matching his mood. I sometimes feel as if she has forsaken me. She sent us on this fool's errand to stop Chalmrake, and instead she led us to our doom. Had it not been for her instructions to me, Gan, Mary, Nary, and Althar would still be alive. Keep telling you, Bog said. You're better off ignoring the gods. Shit, that's why my people killed our gods. Ubarlig rolled his eyes. Oh, for Zinf's sake, not that we killed our god story. Please, Bog, I'm trying to eat. The barbarian pointed a meaty finger at the door. Look, gods are more trouble than they're worth. That Tamisa bitch proved that pretty damn thoroughly. Wincing, Ubarlig started. Bog, show some respect! But Genero held up a hand. No, it's all right, Ubarlig. Bog has a point. Tamisa may well have led me astray. Perhaps we... Genero trailed off as he noticed a strange look on the dwarf's face. Ubarlig, what is it? Those two men who just sat down at the table across the way. They look very familiar. I don't recognize them, Bog said. Turning, Genero followed Ubarlig's gaze. Then his eyes widened, and he turned back so as not to be openly gaping. Ubarlig was staring intently at the priest. So I'm not imagining it, right? No. Genero shook his head and slowly sipped his tea. Impatiently, Bog asked, Who the hell is it? That's Thorn and his brother, Kale. Bog just stared at him blankly. With a snarl, Ubarlig said, That castle outside Treemark! Now Bog blinked. Those shit-suckers? Yes, those shit-suckers who nearly killed all 7 of us, Ubarlig muttered. Once they crossed the drawbridge, Althar and the twins took point, the former to find any magical traps, the latter the more mundane ones. Sure enough, when they were about to pass through a castle corridor that had a shaft of light shining through a small window across the way, the twins stopped them. Mary holding up his left hand and Nary holding up her right. Hang on! Mary knelt down by one of the bricks in the wall, Nary by his side. Will you look at that? That's a great one, that is. Impatiently, Bog started walking forward. I don't know why you two half-wits are looking at that brick, but don't move! Mary snapped. Nary added, You cross that shaft of light and that panel over there. She pointed at an odd-shaped brick in the wall. We'll open right up and shoot at you. Bog frowned. What'll it shoot? Shrugging, Mary said, Hell if we know. Arrows, maybe. Or daggers. Or maybe mud. Althar had had enough. Can you keep the trap from springing? Mary was offended. Of course we can. Nary touched a few spots on the brick on the floor, and then smiled. The party all heard a very loud clicking sound. Mary rose, took off his hat, and threw it across the shaft of light. Nothing happened. Nary stood up next to her brother, and the twins held out both hands. Ta-da! Brightblade strode forward. Let us continue. That makes 2 snares in this allegedly abandoned castle. We must learn who dwells here. Slow down, Gan, Althar said testily. As the halflings have proven, there are traps aplenty here. Let us proceed carefully, that we may confront our foe in one piece. Nodding, Brightblade put a hand on the elf's shoulder. You're right, of course, my friend. Please, go ahead and blaze a path. As they proceeded down the corridor, though, it was Bog who saw the next trap. It was a hatch in the ceiling that caught the barbarian's eye, and he noticed it open right over Althar. Watch it, Althar! Bog cried as he pushed the elf bodily out of the way. A cube made out of some kind of clear gelatinous substance fell from the ceiling and surrounded Bog completely, rendering the huge barbarian immobile. Oh, Zinf, no! Bog! Ubarlig cried. We have to get him out of there. He won't be able to breathe inside a minute or two. Don't bother! That last was said to Brightblade, who nonetheless swiped at the cube with his sword. It embedded itself in the cube. Damnation! Brightblade tugged at the sword's hilt, but it would not move. Ubarlig was shaking his head. There's nothing we can do physically. Only magic can destroy that thing. That's why it attacked Loth Sirhans. He gave Althar a look, but the elf just scowled at him. Sadly, any attack I make upon it will also harm the barbarian. So? Mary said. You don't even like him. Yes, well, I was raised to believe that it's tacky to kill the person who just saved your life. The cube started oozing toward Althar, Bog, and Brightblade's... Excuse me. The cube started oozing toward Althar, Bog and Brightblade's sword, both still trapped inside it. Brightblade shook his head. "We must do something!" Genero spoke then. "Can you do a freezing spell?" "Of course," Althar said, "but do it. Bog is from the north. He can survive in the cold long enough for Gan and Ubarlig to remove the sword from the frozen cube, thus shattering it." "Are you sure that's..." The dwarf started, but the priest interrupted him. "Bog will die in a minute unless we do something. And if magic is all that may affect this thing..." That was good enough for Althar, who gestured, spoke the words of the freeze spell, and moments later the cube stopped its forward motion and was now a large block of ice. Shivering at the sudden drop of temperature in the corridor, Brightblade grabbed the hilt of his sword and tugged hard on it. With a mighty crack that echoed through the corridor, the ice shattered, and Bog fell to the floor amidst the shards of ice, shivering and barely breathing. Genero walked up to him, whispering a soft prayer to Tamisa. In response, the goddess granted him some small healing magic that enabled his very touch to restore Bog. Still shivering, but now breathing normally, Bog clambered to his feet, rubbing his arms with his hand. "Shit, that was cold!" "That's why you shouldn't wear just a loincloth," Mary said. "Piss off!" At the end of the corridor was a double door, and Brightblade strode toward it. "Enough of these foolish games!" Nary winced, and Mary said, "Gan, don't just storm into a pair of doors without..." Ignoring the halflings, Brightblade threw open the doors, which slammed loudly against the walls. The others exchanged glances and shrugs and followed, seeing that the doors opened to a huge, empty room that was probably a receiving room or dining room when the castle was in regular use. The room had a balcony all around it, and two men wearing chainmail and horned helmets stood on it, laughing as they looked down at the party. One of them said, "So, you made it this far." The other said, "Mitos will be disappointed that at least one or two of you didn't die from the troll or the spears." Mary and Nary exchanged glances. "Spears! Why didn't we think of that?" Nary asked. "Or the cube. We were hoping that there'd only be 3 or 4 of you idiots to face Anna, Unu, and Ono." 3 harpies flew in from the window and started encircling the room. They had the wings and legs of an eagle, but the torsos and heads of sickly human women, breasts sagging from their misshapen chests, teeth rotted and pointed, eyes yellow and watery. Brightblade held up his sword. "Who are you that mocks us so?" "We are but thralls, Gan Brightblade," one said. "I am Thorn, and this is my brother, Kale. We are minions of the great Mitos, and he instructed us to kill you and your friends after he lured you here." "It seems," Genero said with a sigh, "that Tamisa was both right and wrong." "No matter," Ubarlig said, brandishing his Fjorm axe. "These harpies will be dead soon enough. Attack!" "I am being sorry," Olaf said in his deliberately broken comment to Genero. "But never before have I seen those 2 men before this morning they are coming in. The names they check in under are being Kale and Thorn." Genero nodded and placed his hands on the front desk of the Dog and Duck. "Thank you, Olaf." "Of course. I am happy to anything be doing for the great heroes who are at my inn they stay. If anything there is I can be doing to make you more comfortable, please just to be telling me soonest, yes?" "We will." Genero smiled and started to turn away. Again, Olaf, "Thank you." As Genero walked away from the desk, Olaf called out, "For example, for the barbarian I could be giving to an actual room?" Chuckling, Genero turned back around. "Thank you. But no. The best way to make Bog comfortable is allow him to continue sleeping in the stables. The only way to improve it would be to make the snow fall upon him, at which point he'll feel just like at home." Olaf shook his bald head. "I am not understanding these peoples from the northern place." "If it makes you feel any better, they don't understand us much either." With that, the priest went out to the aforementioned stables, where Ubarlig was already waiting. Bog arrived a moment after Genero. "I talked to everybody," Bog said. "Ain't nobody knows who those guys are or what they're doing here." "Likewise," the dwarf said, "which means they probably are up to some kind of mischief." Olaf is unfamiliar with them as well, though they did check into the inn under their own names. Bog said, "I also saw a couple of guards wandering around looking squirrely." Genero frowned. "What crest did they wear on their chests?" "What do you mean?" "The symbols on their chests," Ubarlig said. "They indicate what precinct they're from." "Who gives a shit?" The priest sighed. That question was Bog's way of saying he didn't notice. "It does not matter. If the thralls of Mitos are in Cliff's End, it cannot be anything other than ill for the people of this fine city-state. We will observe them until such time as they are somewhere far from other people. Ubarlig stared at General. We're in the middle of the most populous city-state in Flingaria. There is no place far from other people. Tilting his head to concede the point, General said, as isolated as we can be, in any case. For the next several hours, the trio kept an eye on the brothers, who seemed to spend most of their time sitting and eating and talking. Eventually, around midday, they met with two elves. The four of them shared a meal. General was unable to get close enough to overhear their conversation, especially given how loud the dining area of the Dog and Duck got at midday. The place was packed with a wide assortment, from natives to tourists to people who wanted to look at General Bog and Ubarlig. There was even someone from the Castle Guard, a mermaid precinct officer based on the crest of his uniform. That last part was odd, since Mermaid covered the docklands, but maybe the guard was here for lunch. But he did notice one thing. Both elves had neck tattoos that indicated that they were former members of the Shran-Leseth, the special forces of the Elven nation. It had been his dear late comrade, Altharloth Sirhans, who had placed a completely false seed of doubt into his cousin the Elf Queen's mind about the trustworthiness of the Shran-Leseth, tricking the tyrant into disbanding one of her most powerful weapons. After lunch was done, the four shook hands, and the elven soldiers went upstairs, presumably to their rooms. Thorin and Kale proceeded outside. It was when they turned down Sandybrook Way, probably to take advantage of one of that thoroughfare's many brothels, that they moved in. Bog came down from the west side of the street, blocking their way forward. When they turned around, they saw Ubarlig and General. Bog was holding his broadsword with both hands, and Ubarlig held his Fjormax in a similar manner. Look, Thorin said, we don't want any trouble. You wanted plenty of trouble 15 years ago, the dwarf said. I made a promise then, and I intend to fulfill it. Kale winced. Oh, for Wyatt's sake, you're not still pissed about that, are you? Not still pissed? Bog bellowed. I got stuck in a damn gunky cube and then got froze. Not to mention those harpies. All right, that's enough. Whirling around, General saw 5 members of the Castle Guard, all wearing the crest of Dragon Precinct, the section of town where the Dog and Duck was located. 5 more guards came from behind Bog. One looked familiar to General. One of the guards stepped forward. In the name of the Lord and Lady, we gotta bring all 5 of you to the castle. Bog smiled. You and what army? The guard looked at Bog. You're outnumbered 2 to 1, sir. Thorn and Kale held up both hands quickly, and the former spoke even faster. That's 10 to 3, Mr. Guard, sir. My brother and I, we ain't resisting at all, no, sir. Ignoring Thorn, the guard continued. Those odds will get worse in the next few minutes when our reinforcements show up. General frowned, finally placing the familiar guard, who was also the only one present whose crest was from mermaid rather than dragon. You were at the Dog and Duck. The mermaid guard smirked. What of it? Bog held up his sword. We ain't going nowhere we don't want to go. General held up a hand. Bog, please, lower your sword. You kidding me, General? We can take these guys. Ubarlig lowered his axe. And then what? I don't fancy the notion of being a fugitive from the largest law enforcement organization in Flingaria. Nor I, General said. Lower your weapon, Bog. Snarling, Bog did as General asked, to the priest's great relief. Looking at the guard, General said, We will accompany you. Thanks, Brother General. We kind of prefer to avoid violence if we can. They began walking together, a huge group of 10 guards and 5 prisoners? General wasn't sure that was the right term, as they weren't actually arrested, walking down Sandy Brook toward Mirka Way. Unfortunately, Bog does not share that preference. Be grateful that I was able to calm him, because he was right. He would have easily taken all 10 of you, as well as whatever reinforcements you had coming. But Ubarlig was correct as well. The consequences would have been deleterious to us. The guard chuckled at that. Did I say something amusing, guard? The name's Jared, and yeah, trust me, brother, there's plenty of deleterious consequences waiting for you guys. Jared did not explain his words, and Genero didn't bother to ask. Instead, they walked in silence toward the castle, through Dragon and Unicorn precincts. Everywhere they went, people parted and stared and pointed. The priest caught snatches of exclamations here and there. It's Camp Brightblade's friends! I thought they left town after the castle guard found who killed the others. Nah, they ain't leaving town till the real killer's found. Castle guard ain't found shit, bunch of idiots. I love you, Ubarlig! Why is the guard escorting them? Keep shitbrains like you from asking for their autograph. By the time they reached the mansions of Unicorn Precinct, the number of onlookers had decreased significantly. And eventually, they went through the large open portcullis and were escorted to the eastern wing of the castle, but not before their weapons were confiscated. Bog was even less happy about that than he was about going in the first place, but General reminded him that happened the last time they were in the castle, and they got their weapons back when they left. Bog, Ubarlik, and General were placed in one of the interview rooms, with the brothers in the other. And then they waited. Pulled this shit last time, Bog grumbled as he paced the dark room, lit as it was only by a small lantern. Kept us in these damn rooms for hours on end. True, but last time, General said, they also kept us separated. At least we're together now. I just hope it's not that ugly half-elf bitch and her stupid red-bearded partner like last time. Those two really pissed me off. Ubarlik frowned. They're the ones who found the killer. Yes, General said in a faraway voice. What's wrong, General? The dwarf asked. Lieutenants Tresillian and Van Wivel accused us of withholding information. Mary and Nary might still be alive if we'd been honest with them. Stop that. Ubarlik got up from the stool he'd been sitting on. We thought we were facing Chalmrake. Under the circumstances, General Ubarlik, came a deep voice from the doorway, you still should have confided in us. The voice belonged to Lieutenant Torin Van Wivel, the stupid red-bearded partner Bog had referred to. He was entering the room alongside the ugly half-elf bitch, Lieutenant Danthras Tresillian. Were you anyone else, Tresillian said, we would have arrested you for impeding an official investigation. Were we anyone else, General said with a small smile, we would never have been in a position to impede it. True. May I ask why we've been detained in this manner? To keep you from getting into a fight that would damage Sandy Brook Way? Bog pointed at the door. You know who those two are? We do now, yes, Van Wivel said. Former thralls of Mitos the Mage. And why don't you let us kick their asses? Smiling and showing excellent teeth that one would expect from a native of Miverin, Van Wivel said, because they are former thralls of Mitos. The wizard is dead, and the brothers served a term of 7 years in prison. Ubarlik threw up his hands. Come on, Lieutenant, they're plotting something. We saw them meet with two former Shran-Laseth. Probably muscle for their next job. Not exactly, Van Wivel said as they leaned against the wall. You see, we actually investigated Thorn and Kale the moment their boat came into the docks. Boat? General parroted. Tresillian said, yes. It turns out, after your little gaggle killed Mitos, the two brothers managed to make off with quite a bit of gold that the wizard no longer had much use for. They purchased a cargo boat called Wicker's Fury, and have been sailing cargo all over the Garriman for 6 years now. We know this, Van Wivel added, because the moment the Wicker's Fury docked, Mermaid Precinct assigned a guard to tail those two, precisely because they used to work for Mitos. You see, Tresillian said, there's a guard for Mermaid named Fran Lavian. He was one of Mitos' slaves. In fact, he remembers clearly the day you three and Loth Searhands and Brightblade liberated him and Mitos' other slaves at Storm's Pass. Wait a sec, Bog said. You made one of those mindless shitsuckers a guard? Ubarlik looked to the ceiling in supplication. Did you never listen to Althar? Bog grinned. Not if I could help it. That prompted a burst of laughter from Van Wivel, even as Ubarlik said, he told us that it was a spell that enslaved them. Once he cast the counterspell, they were perfectly normal. In any case, Tresillian interrupted before Bog could reply. Lavian recognized Thorn and Kale as soon as they got off their boat, and he tagged them to make sure they weren't up to anything illegal. Tightly, General said, as were we. Yes, Tresillian said witheringly, but the difference is that Lavian is an actual member of the Castle Guard, whose job it is to deal with illegal behavior within the Lord and Lady's domain. And he's also much better at it than you, Van Wivel put in. You see, he was able to determine that Thorn and Kale are legitimate sailors with a legitimate cargo business. General couldn't believe that they were so wrong. Again. But I spoke with Olaf. He said he never saw them before. Shrugging, Van Wivel said, it was their first time at the Dog and Duck. In truth, they haven't spent much time within Cliffsend's walls at all, preferring to stay on their boat. Grumpily, Ubarlik asked, and what of the Shran-Laseth they met with? Former Shran-Laseth, Tresillian said, as indeed they all are now. As it happens, we learned of them from Jared. The guard who brought us in? General asked. Tresillian smiled most unpleasantly. The guard who was assigned to follow you. Bog slammed a fist into the wall. You had someone following us? Since you moved out of the castle, Tresillian said. General shook his head. They hadn't even noticed. It was Gan or the twins who usually picked up on such surveillance, noticing when some mendicant or other spied on them. Neither he nor the other two survivors were trained for that sort of thing. Meanwhile, Ubarlik asked, and did this Jared person determine who the Shran-Laseth are? Stepping away from the wall, Ben Wivel replied. He didn't need to. You see, one of Jared's fellow guards in Dragon is another former Shrenliseth, a woman named Alita. She vouched for the pair that Thorn and Kale met with. They're leather workers who sell a great deal of their works to the Bergan Islands, and recently lost their cargo carrier. What you saw, Tresillian said, was them negotiating with Mitos' ex-minions for shipping rates on Wicker's Fury. Bog hit the wall again. Shit! Please stop doing that, Tresillian snapped. Yeah? Make me, bitch! Bog! General cried, which stopped the barbarian. But it didn't stop Tresillian, who stood right up to Bog. Trust me, barbarian, I could very easily make you. You raise a hand to anyone in this room, and the wards will restrain your ass and bring you to the hole, where I'd be more than happy to let you rot for the rest of your days. See, the Lord and Lady would throw a fit if we put either of those two in, but you? Nobody cares about the idiot from the north. That's enough, Lieutenant, General said. I wish to ask a question. I know you've said that you don't answer questions in this room, but I'd like you to make an exception. I think we've earned it. Tresillian looked away from Bog and stared at General with an intense gaze. You haven't, actually, but you're not under arrest either, nor are you suspects in anything except being stupid. So sure, go ahead and ask. Why did you have us under surveillance? That prompted guffaws of laughter from Tresillian and a small smile from Ben Wivel, though General suspected it was more at his partner's reaction. The question amuses you? General asked testily. Through her laughter, Tresillian said, you have to ask, it does. You see, Ben Wivel said, giving Tresillian a chance to catch her breath, we anticipated that you might try to do something idiotic, so we kept an eye on you. And when Jared and Lavian realized their respective targets had come together, they immediately summoned reinforcements, Tresillian added, and sent a message to us. Bog was shaking his head. I don't believe this shit. We wasn't doing nothing wrong. Yet, Tresillian added pointedly. Had Jared, Lavian, and the others not arrived at Sandy Brook Way when they did, Ben Wivel said, you would have assaulted two innocent men. They ain't innocent by a damn sight, Bog yelled, pointing at the wall this time. Maybe not, Tresillian said, but they've served their time, and now they're citizens of Flingaria whom you were about to assault. If you had gone through with it, you three would be in the hole right now. However, General said, we did not assault anyone. In fact, we have committed no crime, and cooperated with your questions. A cooperation that has now ended. Unless you intend to arrest us, I believe that by the Lord and Lady's laws, we're free to go, yes? Tresillian stepped aside, so the trio could easily exit. By all means, Brother General, get the hell out of the castle. And try to stay out of trouble this time. Ubarlik tried to keep fighting, but the harpy's claws had torn into his leg and he could no longer stand upright. General tried to keep the one harpy at bay with his short sword, but he was fighting a losing battle, especially since Brightblade, Althar, Bog, and the twins were fully occupied by the other two. He needed to get to the dwarf and heal him so he could get back into the fight. But the harpies were smart. The other two traded off going after Althar, keeping the mage from having a moment to formulate a spell. Then, finally, Brightblade and Bog managed to coordinate an attack, with the barbarian swinging high and the warrior swinging low, and they cut through the harpy's wings, sending her careening into the ground for Mary and Nary to stab multiple times with their daggers until she was dead. Bog ran to aid General, while Brightblade went after the other one to distract her, while Althar prepared a spell. Then fortune finally favored them. Or Tamisa smiled upon them, if you ask General. Mary and Nary both had throwing knives, and they were both expert at hitting their targets, but less so when the target flew about the large room the way the harpies did. As a result, the floor was littered with throwing knives. But then Nary threw one that struck the harpy directly in her right eye. On virtually any creature, the eye is the most vulnerable spot, and the harpy died the instant Nary's blade embedded itself there. Even as the harpy crashed to the floor, Bog and Brightblade went after the final one. Althar gestured and muttered the language of mages, and General ran to Ubarli. You will be fine, my friend. A massive light burst interrupted whatever response the dwarf might have supplied, and a moment later the last harpy lay dead on the cracked marble floor. Of Thorn and Kale, there was no sign. Brightblade, who now clutched his ribs in pain that he had been stoically ignoring during the fight. Mary, Nary, see if you can find Mitos' minions. General moved to heal Brightblade, and then Bog, though it took the priest some cajoling to finally allow him to aid the latter. The barbarian always viewed Tamisa's healing touch as a sign of weakness. A few minutes later, the twins came back. Nothing! Whole place is empty! Nary added, Thorn and Kale must have scuppered once they realized we were going to take care of them harpies. Bog slammed a fist into a wall. So this whole damn thing was a trap for Mitos. Bastard wasn't even here. Worry not, my friend, Brightblade said. We will find him. And we'll find those two brothers, Ubarlik added. The next time we see them, I promise to lodge my fjorm right up their asses. Genero stared desultorily at his salad. He, Bog, and Ubarlig were at their usual table at the Dog and Duck. Can I ask a question, Genero? The dwarf said after swallowing his mutton. Genero shook himself out of his reverie. Well, what is it, Ubarlig? Why are we still here? If Chonrik did resurrect himself, the Brotherhood took care of it. Gan, Althar, and the twins are dead. The castle guard is so enamored of our presence that they've stuck a guard to keep an eye on us. He snorted. If we're up to Lieutenant Tresillian, we'd all be in the hole by now. I suppose I just don't see the value of remaining in Cliff's End beyond the storytelling service we've been providing. With a heavy sigh, Genero pulled a battered scroll out of the folds of his robe. He handed it over to the dwarf. This came by messenger during midsummer. Ubarlik unrolled it and read it. Though he was illiterate, Bog leaned over to look at the scroll as well. After perusing it, the dwarf handed it back. Has the bishopric ever held a hearing on you before? Once, but that was when Mitos was mentally controlling the entire bishopric and used the hearing to lure me back to Valessa. Genero took the scroll back. I suppose I'm avoiding returning home. Excuse me. Looking up, Genero saw Thorn and Kale standing by their table, looking contrite. Bog started to stand, but Thorn held up both hands. Look, we don't want any trouble. Kale said, seriously, as weight is our witness, we're straight now. We did our time, and we'd be just as happy to forget we ever even met Mitos. Harshly, Genero said, you allied yourself with evil. Such actions have dire consequences. We weren't allies. Thorn shook his head. We were employees. We didn't give a shit what Mitos wanted to accomplish. We just liked getting 100 gold a week. Ubarlik's eyes widened. A week? Oh yeah, Kale said. Of course, there were all kinds of conditions, like wearing those stupid helmets. And that chainmail shaped like you wouldn't believe, Thorn added. Bog snorted. Armor's for sissies, anyhow. Genero looked away from the two brothers in shame. He had judged these two solely on the basis of who they were employed by. He had rushed to ambush them without giving any consideration to how much things might have changed in a decade and a half. Or indeed, not changed much. Like all those in Flingaria who were not wealthy, those two were simply trying to find a way to survive. He certainly couldn't blame an ordinary person for jumping at the chance to make 100 gold pieces per week, especially when the person paying it was a powerful wizard who likely used coercive measures to ensure employee loyalty. Why don't you join us? Genero said. Say what? Bog asked. That's a great idea, Ubarlik said. Hell, I've always wondered what it was like working for a lunatic like that. We'd love to, Kale said, and Thorn went to grab 2 stools to place at the table. As he sat, Thorn said, for starters, Mitos always wanted us to speak a certain way. That whole, we are minions of the great Mitos nonsense, that was all him. If we didn't talk like that, he docked our pay and threatened to turn us into newts. That's why we don't have bosses, Bog said. I'm my own damn boss. Well, easy for you to say, being the size of a house and all, Kale muttered. Bog, Genero said quickly before the barbarian could respond to that. Look, Kale went on, we two were orphans with no skills and no prospects. Mitos hired us, paid us more money than we'd ever seen. And we actually learned some skills. We learned sailing thanks to working for him. Thorn smiled. Of course, it took us a while to get the hang of it. Yeah, we spent 7 years in Stir, but we had our money when we got out, so we bought Wicca's Ferry. And it's been great. Thorn's smile widened. Honestly, life of a sailor is the best ever. On the sea, everything makes sense, you know? Genero had always hated sailing, and so said nothing. Ubarlik asked, so you traversed the Garraman to and from the Bergan Islands? Thorn nodded. Yeah, we scattered out the place, and we set it all up. It took months, especially after Andir. Frowning, Genero said, that was the Bergan Island that sunk, wasn't it? Thorn nodded. It didn't sink. Mitos sunk it. It was right after you guys fought him in the forest of Nimvale. Shuddering, Genero said, don't remind us of that, please. It took weeks to get the smell of hobgoblin out of my robes. Bog shrugged. I didn't think it was that bad. Laughing, you Barlick said, because it was competing against all the other odors that linger on your person. To Genero's relief, Bog actually returned the laugh. The conversation continued into the evening, with others gathering round to hear stories of Gan Brightblade and his friends' adventures as usual, but focusing more on when they battled the evil Mitos the Mage, with the added bonus of how things went from Mitos' side. As the stories went on into the night, for the first time since Gan Brightblade died in his room in this very inn, Brother Genero of Valessa's feeling of discontent dissipated. He felt good. Thank you very much for watching. We'll have a third Precinct story on Friday. Please check me out online, DeCandido.net. There are ordering links for all the Precinct books on DeCandido.net, including the latest book, Mermaid Precinct, and I'm currently working on Phoenix Precinct, which will be the next book. Check me out, my blog at decandido.wordpress.com. Read my Patreon at patreon.com/krad. If you support at $10 a month or higher, you will get vignettes featuring my original characters. There are already more than half a dozen vignettes featuring the Precinct's characters. So check that out. And there are other rewards at different levels as well. If you can't afford $10 a month, there's things like movie reviews, TV reviews, cat pictures, excerpts from works in progress, and so on. Thank you very much. I'll see you Friday, and please stay safe.